Today we continue our series on Exodus. If you turn to the Bible to Exodus chapter 2, a scene that it could be you and I, it could be anybody doing it. It's a scene about a person who feels a great injustice is being done. Now, I want to ask all of us, how many, has anyone here lived their life and never felt like that anybody did an injustice to them? That you were always, in every situation in your life, in every circumstance, you were treated fairly? Raise your hand. I don't see too many hands going up. So we understand what it is to be treated unfairly. And you have inside of us a sense of, we would like justice to be done. Why doesn't God stop this? You know? Well, Moses felt that. Even though Moses, if you remember, he had been rescued from the river, they were told, remember, first the two midwives who were over all the midwives were told, well, at the time of the birth of the baby, you are to go in and see if it's a boy or a girl. And what were you supposed to do with the boys? Kill them. Kill the baby boys. When I heard that governor of Virginia a few years ago say that even if the baby somehow survives and it is born alive, they still had the right to kill the baby, I thought, what kind of governor, what kind of public figure? I wish that governor had said that 100 years ago. I know what would have been done then. The legislature, which in Virginia is called the House of Burgesses, would have called immediately for a recall election, and they would have voted him out, thrown him out, and never wanted to hear his name again. But no, some people celebrated that it was so wonderful that a sector of our society, the women, had the right to kill, even if the child is born alive, kill their own baby.
That's terrible.
Can you wonder why Texas and Georgia and other states are rising up and saying, we want to save our babies, and we certainly are not going to vote in some kind of governor like that Virginia governor. Shame on him, and God will hold him accountable. God will hold him accountable. Now Moses saw all the injustice. If Moses is born about whom we think he was born according to the dating of King Solomon, then slavery, that kind of slavery that Moses was under and the Hebrew people, had been around about 25, 30 years. And then Moses is born. Now, if you remember the two ladies, they said, well, we can't do anything at birth. The Hebrew women are so strong and quick, they have their births before we can even arrive on the scene. And they have their babies. We don't even know where they're at. So then the Pharaoh gave a public order that every single person had the right to go and take Hebrew boy babies and throw them in the river. Throw them in the river. Anyone had the right to throw them in the river. Any male baby of the Hebrews. Horrible to think there would be mobs of people or gangs or somebody's coming through and they're killing male babies. But you remember the birth of Jesus, how Herod the Great said all the babies in Bethlehem and around Bethlehem would be killed 2 years old and under, and they were. Now Moses he was put in the river, so in a way they technically fulfilled that. He was in the river. The Pharaoh's daughter found him, kept him, had him grow up in her house. Now he's 40 years old, and he sees how the Hebrews people are being treated. Let's look in Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. And it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens. Now he had probably been somewhat cushioned and separated from seeing the way they were treated. And he goes out and he sees it. And he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew. Now when it says smite, that word is hitting hard. It would be enough to break a back, break a leg, kill someone. It was hitting, beating hard, said one of his brethren. And he looked back this way and that way. Now he looked around, and when he saw that there was no person, no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Now, there's lots of sand. I've been to Egypt, and everywhere you see just huge areas of sand. And we kind of know where they're working. They're probably working on a temple, or they're working on a pyramid or something like that, because that's where they build them, is out where there's a lot of sand. And you can hide a body in the sand. Now, it doesn't decay real quick because it's a dry area. But here, he slew the Egyptian. He hid him in the sand. We were in Saqqara, which is a funeral cemetery, a huge, huge royal cemetery. And I can just see them burying something in the sand there. And he did. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together. So he saw 2 Hebrew slaves arguing. They were having an argument and pushing each other probably and fighting. And he said to him that did the wrong, wherefore smitest thou my fellow? And he said, who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killest the Egyptian? In other words, he looked around to see if other Egyptians were watching him, but some of the slaves saw him. Some of the slaves saw him. Now sometimes when someone does a crime, they think children aren't watching, or they think certain people that are always going around aren't watching. But there's always someone there, and even if you do something and no one there, there's always the Lord. Now Moses had taken and made the decision himself. He didn't go and pray about it. He didn't say, what can I do to help my brothers and sisters, especially my brothers in slavery? He didn't ask God for help. That's the first thing he did wrong. He did not involve it. When we see something that's going on that's not right, we have to ask wisdom of the Lord. We have to ask God to help and get wisdom from Him. His wisdom is higher than our wisdom. And our sense of justice is sometimes not correct. Let me tell you what the first stage of being in favor of justice is, and you're going to be surprised. When you go before God's judgment, is He going to ask you about someone else? No. Who's He going to ask you about? Yourself. So I have to ask myself, am I always fair and just in every one of my relationships? And sometimes without meaning to be, I'm not always. Sometimes I'm impatient. Sometimes I'm too quick about things. Y'all understand what I'm saying? Have y'all? So I need to say, Lord, help me be a just person. Now let me tell you what the highest form of justice is. Sometimes we say, well, I want to be a good person. Sometimes we say, I want to be a just person. But there's a word that's better for us as Christians. I want to be a godly person. I don't want to be just a good person. I don't want to be just a just person. I want to be a godly person. Now, folks, that's the highest form of justice. That means I can sing the song. I love this song. And He walks with me, and He talks with me, and He tells me I am His own. That was one of the requests Thursday for the nursing home, Vicki, about singing that song. I love it. The Lord is with us every day if you're a Christian. His Holy Spirit is inside of us, giving us wisdom and giving us power and guidance. Sometimes we want to quickly react to something. And we say, no, I don't want to do that. Sometimes I get so put out with people, and I see other people not treated fairly sometimes. We have to deal with the situation, and we know that something's unfair about it. And yet, there's no use to make a deal about it. They're not going to admit anything wrong, this or that. So you go on about it. So they ask him, who made you a prince or a judge over us? Now you're going to kill us like you killed the Egyptians. So he realizes they know who has killed the Egyptian. And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. In other words, probably they've told all the other slaves, and probably some slave to try to get ahead has told one of the Egyptian overlords so he can get some kind of advantage, maybe a little bit more food, maybe less work, maybe an easier job. It says, now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. Now, so listen, I've heard it preached and I've heard it said sometimes, Moses, when he heard the Hebrews say that, he fled. That was not when he fled. What does the Bible say here? Folks, it's always good. Let's read every word of the Bible is true, and every word of the Bible adds something to it. Here it says that Pharaoh first heard of it, and then, what did he do? A warrant for the death of Moses. So there's a death warrant on his life. And but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. How do you establish justice in the world? Let me give you a few ideas. First is you have to look at the scriptures and decide right and wrong. Now our world tries to make it up. Let me say one of the things I see being made up in the United States. It's wrong for a white person to be racist against a black person. But not only is it right for a black person to be racist, a black child to be racist against a white child, even accusing them of used to own us. I've heard them say phrases like, used to own us. They didn't. And they'll say things like, well, now you need to pay for it. So there it is, even intensifying the racism. Now, most of you all know, and all the ones on Facebook know, I literally work with peoples of all races around the world. And everybody should be treated fairly. But you don't need to pick on white boys and girls in public schools in the United States of America, or pick on university students who are white young men or young women, and lay the guilt trip of slavery on them. The Egyptians, who certainly are not white, Sudanese, who are not white, Africans and others all over the world, the Asians who had slaves, and even worse, the Russians who had peasants who were worse than slaves. They were sold with the land. The Ecuadorians who sold the people, the indigenous Indians, the Quichuas and others with the land. When you bought the land, you got the slaves with them. There's a lot of guilt to go around, but that's not what we're living today. That's not our reality. Now, if we want to go back and dig up trash on people, there's lots of trash to dig up on everybody. In fact, I think I hear a little verse from the Bible that says, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Let me tell you two cases. Historians want to go back and dig up, where did the blacks on the slave ships come from? So they had two ships that had the full cargo of slaves. And so they went to those countries in Africa. They looked to see what had happened. Of the slaves, the normal age was 11 to 18 years old, so they were young. 90% young men. 90% young men. 11 to 8. 26% have been sold to the slavers by their parents. By their parents. Now that's a condition in the book of Leviticus that is attacked, that you cannot sell your girls into prostitution. You cannot sell your boys into slavery. That's actually a custom that's talked about against in the book of Leviticus. Now, where did the other slaves come from? Very few were captured in the wild. Y'all remember the movie Roots? And the movie Roots, which is interesting, and it gave some blacks some idea of being identified in Africa. It was an apologetic, affirming that Islam was better than Christianity, which has not proved to be the case or true. But it's just not where they came from. Other times, Indian groups, one indigenous group, one black tribe, had attacked another tribe, and the ones left over was sold into slavery. Now, if you look in the book of Amos, he talks against several countries surrounding Israel in the book of Amos. And it says, for 3 sins and 4, that God's judgment's coming. When he mentions Edom, he mentions the Edom, he says, for 3 sins and 4. And one of those sins is the sin that they had gone in, they had attacked a small city, a town, we would call it a town, and they had taken the town prisoner, and they had sold that whole town into slavery. Now we remember Julius Caesar, we remember before him Pompey. Now Pompey was the first one to conquer Jerusalem and carried a large group of Jews as slaves back to Rome. When Paul is writing the book of Romans to the city of Rome, to the Jewish Christians, some of those Jewish Christians were really the ancestors of some of those Jews from Pompeii when Pompey had carried them as slaves back. No group of people were exempt from being slaves. The Germans enslaved the English. The Romans enslaved the Germans. The Russians enslaved the Polish. The Chinese enslaved the Vietnamese. I mean, there's all kinds of enslavement that's going on in every kind of direction. Now, that doesn't make any slavery anywhere right. But I'm kind of like the trucker, and I'm kind of like the Bible. When you ask someone a question, and when you talk about life, you don't need to talk about all the past as much as what do you need to say. What does the trucker say? Where are you headed? Where are you headed? That's the trucker who asked another trucker, where are you headed? Not where did you come from. We know where we came from. We all came out of sin. Since Adam, we all are in an environment of sin. And the environment of sin today is even growing. Racism, I would say, is stronger now than when I was a boy. Racism in 2021 is stronger than racism was when I was a boy in the 1960s. Now, why is that? Part of it's the nationalism. People are closing their borders. There are all kinds of things going on. Governments are trying to be dictatorships, some of the governments. They don't want people to come in and proclaim that everybody should be treated fairly. They want their own vision of the world forced on their own people. I can think of countries and leaders who want that kind of thing to happen. But folks, the truth is the truth. And the truth will stand the test of time. So what are the stages for justice? First, read the Bible and understand what is right and wrong, what is just and unjust. Second, who's the person you have more influence over than anybody? Yourself. You say, I want to have my heart and my life to be a light wherever I go for what's right and just. For what is right and just. Third, the group of people that I'm with, whoever it is, I'm going to promote being fair and just in that group of people. I thank God for my church family. Talk about fair and just and loving and committed to the Lord. You've got it. My own personal family, I think about my son and his wife and his little boy, my grandson. I think about my daughter and my son-in-law and their 5 little children. And they want to have a just and a fair world. And they fight for that. One's a businessman and one is a person who's very important in a college now. And he's putting teachers and others together to help him in his ministry of training young preachers. So I think about, I want to help them and influence them to be as fair as possible. My son-in-law, when COVID hit, he decided he would not let anyone go. Probably, I would estimate, he lost half of his fortune and money in those first months of COVID, keeping his employees. But he was proud to do it, Brother Darrell. and I'm proud of him. Does he talk about it? No. When the government came out with President Trump and he said, we're going to help you keep your employees, he applied and got that help. And that helped him keep from bleeding money. Fairness starts in one person. You know, when someone starts talking about, well, we need to donate, we need to give. And the next thing I know, they're talking about not them giving from their wallet. They're talking about the taxpayers giving. They're talking about Uncle Sam giving. Then it's not charity. Don't tell me charity. Charity is when I get my wallet out and I get my dollar out of my wallet and I donate. That's charity. The other is abusing Uncle Sam, who's going to abuse the taxpayers, because Uncle Sam has no Dollar Tree. He has no tree that produces money. His tree is those of us who are dumb enough to work, and we work. We're dumb enough to work, and we're dumb enough to get money in, getting money out of us. That's how Uncle Sam works anymore. Now, Leviticus chapter 19 has a statement that needs to be said. And Leviticus chapter 19, and I will tell anybody, this is what it says. In chapter 19, verse 15, Leviticus 19, ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. Now, it's talking about legal action, but we could talk about even in executive orders from presidents. We could talk about congressional laws or Supreme Court laws. Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. Thou shalt not respect the person of the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. In other words, just so you can get politically ahead, you don't do things that will make the welfare class vote for you. Just so you can get ahead, you don't do things to just make the wealthiest vote for you. You treat everybody fairly, everybody justly, and everybody the way they need to be treated. But it says, in righteousness shalt thou judge thy neighbor. Now it later has a way, if you look above, it has a way for the poor. It says, and thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of them. In other words, what they would do back then is, it was harvest time. You had a day you would harvest this piece of ground. You could only harvest your ground one time. One time. You can't go back over it. So you harvest it one time. Then the elders of the city would know who the poor people are, the widows and others, that really truly poor, the orphan and others. And they would say, tomorrow is the second day of harvest. And guess who gets the second day of harvest? The poor in the community. Come out and work. You work to make your living. Now, is a harvest the second day as good as the first? Absolutely not. Those who have planted, those who have taken care of the plant, those who have cared for it, they deserve day one of the harvest. You don't take your grapes in and you sell your grapes, or you take whatever else in and sell it, and then have to give part of your money to the poor. Now, if you want to do that, that's fine. That's charity. But if they're able to work, they have day two of the harvest, and they can come out. I look at the great state of Georgia now. I see the great days of harvest going. And they'll go through a field and pick up all the watermelons. And then guess what will happen to the watermelons that are left? That was the wrong size, or they were still a little bit green. We don't have the second harvest. They don't have to work. Now, when you're poor, we declare you incompetent, mentally ill. You can't do anything. You're not responsible for everything. We have to spoon feed you. Well, we got direct deposit. You don't even have to go and show up. We've got it such a way now that, oh no, you don't even have to answer for yourself. You get on the ticket on the list. Oh, well, you're fine then. Folks, we're behind the Bible in the book of Leviticus. We're behind, we're even more primitive than the book of Leviticus, much less the New Testament. There is a lot of injustice in the world. In the United States of America and probably other countries in the Western world, Germany, France, and others, they're going to go into the working class home and they're going to rob us of even more taxes for this federal government, local government, state government. And I was telling you, we have our House of Representatives that really are more like a little Senate anymore. They represent 700,000 to 800,000 people, each one. Do you think they really care about one opinion or two opinions? They're bullied by a group. They're bullied by this. They're bullied by a little bit of money. They're bullied by a pile of people. Thinking about doing what's right is sometimes far in the back of their mind. That they will be judged. Not just at the end of time. Sometimes when we, as Christians, we talk about judgment as God's judgment only comes when we die and we're judged individually. That's not the way God works in history. For example, if you go to Italy, you see no powerful Italy. There is no Roman Empire. I've been to Egypt. Egypt, even though it's the 14th largest country in the world, is dirt poor. Has a lot of problems. And Egypt is one of those countries where more people leave than come in. I want to put a country on your heart this morning that you may not have heard of. The country that more people leave than any other country in the world is, of course, India. And then second is China. But there's a country that's way high and it's got a huge population called Bangladesh. Now we have tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 or 200,000 Bangladeshis in our country. And we're going to have more in the future. They're now the second largest number of immigrants leaving their country. And they're all over in Miami and New York and Atlanta, other places. If you ask, they'll usually just say, well, India or the Middle East or whatever, but they're really from Bangladesh. There's lots of them. Bangladesh, 300 to 400,000 people net loss. Now others are coming in. A few are coming into Bangladesh, especially Muslims from India. Half of those will wind up in the United States every year over a period of years. Millions of people. Their governments are not meeting their needs. They're unjust. They're not fair. The principles of God needs to be proclaimed. But big dictators and authoritarian leaders, they don't want the Bible to be proclaimed. It's truthful, it's honest, it's fair. Some of them now are using all kinds of excuses. They don't want Christians to be there. But those excuses doesn't hold water. It's like the guy from India who I'd met in Albany. And when I was in the airport in Atlanta, getting ready to fly to Russia to preach and to teach, he come running. He was going back to his mother country of India. He came running down that long runway at the airport. Have y'all been to the airport in Atlanta? You know, where you check in, the check-in counter? He come running down and his little short chubby wife was behind him, running with him, and then 2 or 3 children, little bitty small children running behind him. They were all in there and they said, "Pastor, Pastor, Pastor." So they come on down there, and this is what he said to me. It's been several years since I went to my home country of India, but I'm going back now. His mother was having a big birthday. I don't know if it's 80 years or 90 years or 70 years, whatever, having a birthday, and he was going back and all the family. And he said, "My brother told me that there's some Christians." Now they were also from India. These are just Indians from a different province. But some Indians who were Christians had started preaching in their communities because they're Hindu. And he asked me, "Well, what do you think about, you're there in the United States and you're around Christians, what do you think about Christians?" And he said, Pastor, I thought about you. Now, every time I would go to Albany, I would stop at his store and buy a Diet Coke and a honey bun. And I'd talk to him about the Lord, because nobody would be there. Nobody hardly ever stopped at the store. Some would stop to get some gas or whatever, but I usually didn't, because it was a little bit higher there at other places I stopped. But I'd stop to get a drink and a honey bun. My honey bunning days are over, by the way. I can't have honey buns now. That was my honey bunning years, and I loved it. But anyway, he said, I thought about you, and I told him, I said, oh, let them come in. They make the best neighbors. They're loving, friendly people. Let them come in. And I think about, I never thought about that, but here, and I asked him, I said, well, how many people live here? He said, oh, it's a small region. He said, I only have 250, 300,000 people. And I thought, that's a lot of people. To me, 250, 300,000 people is a lot of people. Of course, in their cities, they have millions and millions, you know. But I said, Lord, just for me sharing with them how God loves them. I didn't know that because sometimes his wife would be there and he had a son sometimes was there, or maybe it was his younger brother, I don't know, but there was usually 3 adults. It was he, his wife, or another guy who was also from India. They would be in the store, and I always talked friendly with them. I always told them about the Lord, and I thought I wasn't getting anywhere. So we have to show our justice, show that we want to treat people right, show we want to be fair. Now, if you go by there now, the store is all closed down and locked up. I guess the property's for sale or whatever. But I always remember that family from India who lived there and worked in that store, and how just by showing a little attention and kindness, it made a difference somewhere else. When people think about Christians, wherever they're at in the world, I want them to think about a group of people who are just and fair, who love all people. And violence is not our way to do things, but to love. Moses had a sense of justice. It was human, it was worldly. He wanted to solve the problem himself. You know what? I can't solve the problems in America, and you can't either. Even if we vote and vote and vote and vote, it won't solve. But Jesus Christ, if we'll turn our hearts and lives and turn our nation over to Christ, He can make a difference. And He can change people's lives. And He can even change politicians. I always remember the biography of Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower. You know, he was kind of he believed in religion and kind of tipped his hat to it, and he was somewhat religious. But when he was running for president of the United States, he saw such good people across the United States. Good, strong Christian people. And he was somewhat overwhelmed at the goodness and the Christianity of the American people. Now, he had met their young boys, you know. He knew piles of them. But running for president, he saw what homes they came out of. And Dwight Eisenhower became a deep Christian. Became a deep Christian. Now, a few years ago, I was speaking somewhere, and a woman afterwards come up, and she was friends with, the Eisenhowers, the Nixons. They had a daughter or somebody that intermarried. Y'all remember that? It was their daughter. Strong, fine, Christian girl. And she said it's because Grandpa was such a strong Christian, they became strong Christians. Does it make a difference being a Christian? You better believe it. You better believe it. Ask Jonathan Edwards, who from his descendants would come 3 U.S. presidents, 7 U.S. senators, piles of congressmen, and dozens of educators, presidents of universities, and mayors, all kinds of folks, business people. Important because they let their Christian principles move them forward. I want to leave a legacy like that, a Christian legacy, that my family know there was a Christian person who came through. May we pray. Father, thank you for your blessings, for your presence in our lives. Teach us, oh Father, to follow you and to be just and holy. And Father, above being good or being righteous, truly we want to be godly. Trust in what you call right and wrong, and then live it. Father, if we have decisions to be made, help us to make those decisions. For we ask this in Christ's name. Amen.